local police departments there, a couple police cars, police chief, Charles, my plant ops director's there. And so there's a policeman at the gate, like entering into the construction site, and he's got his pad out taking names, who can access this or not. So I walk up, introduce myself, get into the construction site, and I see a big pile of dirt. And I notice they're all standing near it. Well, I glance over and I can see the, front third of a human skull in the dirt. I'm thinking,
Jeez.
well, there it is.
The business of healthcare is hard, creating a badlands of terrain that is difficult to navigate. Some think the most brilliant minds in business are on Wall Street. They are wrong. The most brilliant minds are in healthcare. They have to be to thrive and survive. This podcast explores concepts in leadership, management, sales, and negotiation with those brilliant minds. The Healthcare Badlands podcast is generally planned, but unscripted, unedited, and uncut, so you get the honest and unfiltered experience. Your host is Dr. Tom McDougall, a 30-year veteran of healthcare with 23 years of hospital CEO experience. His guests are carefully selected experts from across the industry. They offer insights, expertise, and some great real-life, often hilarious stories. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Welcome to the Healthcare Badlands podcast. Today I have Mike Neuendorf with me. Mike has about 13 years experience as a hospital CEO. He is now a regional vice president with Gallagher Insurance, and he's transitioned into kind of a different sector of healthcare. But thrilled to have Mike on here. I'm going to warn everybody in advance because this is going to be a weird episode of our podcast. And let me preface that. Usually I have some serious discussions with some funny stories. Mike and I have known each other for well over 30 years now. And we both ended up in healthcare. We both ended up as hospital CEOs, but I married Mike's older sister. And so when I met Mike, he was still a college student at Georgia Tech. And so I have known Mike for a really long time. The old phrase is you can't choose your relatives, you can choose your friends. Well, I've chosen both. Mike is a good friend of mine, and he is freaking hilarious. So today's podcast is going to be completely different in that we're just going to tell stories. Neither one of us run hospitals anymore. So these stories are all possible. If we were still running hospitals, we'd have to think this through and maybe make a different plan. But we both have a list of long stories. And second thing I'll preface is there's going to be more than one episode that we're going to release from this. We have agreed that we're going to record for a period of time. We're going to have to stop. We may record again at a future date. All right. But Mike, so glad to have you with me.
Yeah, Tom, good to be here. You let in and you talked about, well, first I heard weird, non-serious, and then I thought healthcare insurance show. What are we talking about, right? Oh, wait, I did cuss. I said I wasn't going to. Um, I think running the hospital is fun. It's like running 12 different businesses in one, where you've got legal, construction, capital planning, hospitality, the clinical side. So the things that can be frustrating day by day and disrupt your day are also the things that make it super fun. I've heard it said in Alabama, where we're both from, and great place to live, super place to raise a family. I've heard it said, if you don't love the weather, just wait 10 minutes. And it's sort of like that in healthcare, I think. If your day's going normal and like you plan, like your calendar says, just wait 10 minutes, right? Something's
Yeah.
going to disrupt the day.
Well, you add all these different factors. I mean, you take that it's super labor intensive. So there's, largest organization I operate had 2,200 employees and 800 doctors. That's 3,000 people to create material. And crazy stuff happens, intentionally and unintentionally. And I think that's what leads to all these great stories. But the fact that, you got to be careful not to tell all these stories. You tell them in small groups. We have chosen a platform to tell some of these stories. And I want to jump right into a story, Mike. Okay. And it is one of my favorite stories that you tell. And healthcare has a great sense of humor because we deal in this very serious environment of taking care of patients, but funny stuff happens. And I think people choose healthcare because to some extent you get the opportunity to have a good sense of humor. So the story I want to hear today, Mike, and I think our listeners would like to hear, is about when human remains was found at your hospital. So I'm going to turn it over
Oh,
to you.
wow. Yeah, this is one of those that you never forget. I was with a group of colleagues a couple months back, and I started telling some of these stories and reminding them that these best dramas on TV are based in hospitals for a reason, right? And I got about 10 stories in, and an old friend of mine walked up and said, "Wait, did you tell him this story?" "Nah, I'm old and I forgot that one," and started telling it. "Wait, did you tell this?" And so, 6 or 7 stories later, I was like, "God, I've forgotten a lot of these." This is one, though, that you honestly never forget. So I'm working in Southern Alabama at a facility, happened to be on the Chamber of Commerce board, was at a chamber lunch meeting. And let me step back. We were building a heart and vascular center on campus. And so using Robinson Morton out of Birmingham, shout out to Bill Morton and Mark Maddox and Charles Eubanks and the whole team there. Great organization. So we're using them as a contractor on site. They've just dug the footings to our heart and vascular center and poured these footings. And so we're right on progress. Again, I mentioned all the hats we wear in healthcare and the different businesses we run. I always enjoyed the construction side of it. Had
Yeah.
some engineering background and loved watching and being a part of this. So right on schedule, everything's going good. Beautiful blue sky day. I'm down the street about a mile and a half south at a chamber meeting. Walk out of the meeting and my cell phone rings. And so it's Charles Eubanks, who now works for Robinson Morton. He was my plant operations director at the time. He said, "Hey, bud, where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm walking out of the chamber meeting,
It's
Charles."
amazing
He
how
said,
many of
"Okay,
our
well,"
stories start that way.
yeah, yeah. And I guarantee Charles said, "Hey, bud." So I said, "Well," I walked out of the chamber meeting, and he said, "Okay, well, I need you back on the job site when you get back here." I said, "Okay, no problem." Hang up the phone, migrate across the street to get some gas. So I'm pumping gas, tank's about half full, cell phone rings again. It's Charles. Like, I answer the phone. "What the hell, Charles? What? Where are you?" I said, "I'm getting gas." Like, what is minute by minute check on me, right? So he says, I need you on, I know you need me on the job site. We just covered this." I said, "What, did you dig up a body?" Silence. Uh-huh. I said, "Oh God." So all these things start running through your mind, right? Like burial ground. I mean, what's going to happen with the project schedule? Oh hell, how am I communicating this up the line? I mean, your mind starts reeling, right? He said, "Uh-huh." I said, "Okay, heading there." So I honestly don't know if I drug the fuel hose down the street with me. I don't really remember how I got out of there, but it was in an expeditious manner. So I head that way. I called marketing director en route. I'm like, "Look, a body's been dug up on the construction site behind the hospital. Apparently, one of the local news affiliates en route, they got wind of it over the police scanner. It was a whole story already." I'm like, "Just meet me back there, but we're not making any comment yet." So I go, so there's a main highway running north and south through there. I get on the back road that's running parallel, which I think had like a 35 or 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, and I'm sure I was doubling that. I come peeling into the back parking lot. So we're on the back side of the hospital. They've got the whole construction zone all marked off with yellow police tape. All the subcontractors are under this big oak tree back to the back. They've got lunch pails out now and are sitting and enjoying the shade since it's all been shut down. So local police department's there, a couple police cars, police chief, Charles, my plant ops director's there. And so there's a policeman at the gate, like entering into the construction site, and he's got his pad out taking names, who can access this or not. So I walk up, introduce myself, get into the construction site, and I see a big pile of dirt. And I notice they're all standing near it. Well, I glance over and I can see the, front third of a human skull in the dirt. I think,
Jeez.
well, there it is. So, so I walk over and I start talking to one of the contract leads that's there, the supervisor and police and Charles, my plant ops guy, and And I said, well, it's got a healthy set of teeth. Do we think it's male or female? They're looking at me like I'm nuts. I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know, watching CSI or Dateline or something. I mean, can we tell if it's male or female, or how long has it been there? And they're like, man, we don't know. We just dug it up. So I'm like, all right, well, I need to make a call. So I get out my cell phone and I'm scrolling through my phone. I'm getting ready to call my big boss a couple states away. And so I get him
who
on the
I
phone, and I
also
am
worked with. I know him
yeah,
well.
who Tom also.
So I,
Yeah, yeah. My
yeah,
a
just to set
mentor
the
still
tone.
a mentor's
Yeah, amazing individual, okay, that I love dearly, but he's a very serious person. Okay, so let's make
yes.
sure we've established that. He's a very serious person. He loves his team, but he is all business. So let's get that established.
Yeah,
You're
100
about to call this person.
100%. Yes, 100%. So I've got his phone, his number scrolled up, and I mean my finger is mid send. Here comes a crime scene investigation car in the parking lot like Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, dirt is flying. I don't know if he did a donut when he arrived, but it was a commotion, right? So he comes rolling in. So that caused me to put my phone down because I didn't need all this disruption in the background of this very important phone call. So he comes in. And so the chief of police is standing there with me, and Charles and one of his plan ops leads and this crime scene investigation guy. And chief of police says, "Man, you've got a great team here, Mike." And I said, I do. I enjoy coming up here after hours, watching them replace chillers. Just a great team, knowledgeable, as all of the plan ops individuals are. I think that we worked with through the many
Absolutely.
years in healthcare. Uh, just great people. Some of my best friends still today that I stay in touch with. So he says, great group of people here. I said, yeah, absolutely, love these guys. And he looked straight at me in the eyes and said, you're going to have fun getting them back. April Fools. So I look with his face. Charles cuts his eyes at me and he takes off running. And I'm like, I'm going to kill you when I get you. So it was an elaborate hoax. One of the Plan Ops workers, loved these oddities and things from a local shop, and he had bought this resin, replica of a human skull that looked so real. The chief of police said, "You were so calm and cool under pressure." I'm like, man, I don't know. Background, we've got to be in this role, but what else am I going to do? I got to ask questions about the teeth and the age, and we got a big kick out of it. So I just said, Charles, what would you have done had I hit send to the big boss? He goes, oh hell, I don't know. He's just glad I didn't. We gotta wrap in this story. We got a picture of me standing there holding the skull with this disgusted face, and the chief of police and Charles next to me. It made it in the annual Robbins and Morton newsletter that they send out with all of their big projects through the year and whatnot. It was funny. It was on like the centerfold spread highlighting the Heart and Vascular Center. I was at Robbins and Morton a couple weeks back, and I looked around the lobby and I did not see a framed copy of this very famous picture, right, holding the skull. And I told Bill Morton, and I told the receptionist up front. I'm like, I'm really a little heartbroken. I thought that story was worthy of a framed picture here. She said, "You're the guy." So anyway, maybe it'll be up at some point.
Well, what's so amazing is I think you told me that story within 24 hours of it actually happening. And I just had this rush of just panic that came over me because what if you had hit send and called the boss? I
Yeah.
cannot imagine the training we would have received about, uh, you know, uh, gentlemen, not everything that you think is funny is funny. Because it would have set off all the
There's a
alarm
place
bells
for
in the
fun, and
corporate
this
office.
isn't it.
Yeah, there's no fun
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's funny
What
how
what
those. Go ahead.
what I did do was wait about 2 weeks, and I called our boss's assistant, who was super also, and
Yeah, she was awesome.
his sidekick and support for I don't know 20 plus years, maybe 30, and just said, look, I need to tell you. a story that I really think is funny. And at the most appropriate time, and you know our boss better than any of us, when he's having a really good day and you think he would get a chuckle out of this story, I need you to share this with him. And so I let her take the fun and tell the story. And next time I saw him, I got a little grin and a wink and said, "That was a funny story." In the back of his mind, I'm sure he's thinking, "I'm glad you didn't call me."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, she's funny though, because I loved her. I hated when she retired, because I would call her and say, "Hey, how's your day?" And she'd say, "It's good." And I'd say, "Okay, I've got something I need to speak with Mr. So and so about." And she'd go, "Oh, Tom, I don't know if this is a good day." And I would say, "You're right.
Okay.
I will call back in a few days." And she goes, "I think that's smart." This episode is sponsored by CO Management Solutions, a revenue cycle company you may not have heard of, but you need to hear this. There is little healthcare organizations can do about inflation-related expenses, but you can make sure you're collecting 100% of your revenue you have earned. Theo uses AI and the latest technology paired with an efficient team to aggressively collect your hard-earned revenue at an attractive commission. Start today with a free analysis of what you are leaving uncollected and recover that revenue quick with CO. For more information, visit coms.com. That is SCIOMS.com. I got to tell one of my stories. Physician recruitment is always an adventure, particularly when you're in a smaller town with a smaller hospital. You've experienced this as well. Um,
Yep.
but I got to tell the story of Shawilly. And people who know me well know this story because I have told this story 100 times. But in small communities and small hospitals, recruiting physicians can be a little bit of a challenge. People that are there are amazing people, but getting somebody to move to a small community sometimes is an issue. So when you have the opportunity to bring somebody in for a visit and they're interested in your opportunity, you pull out all the stops. It's a big event.
Right.
It's not like, a lunch meeting. Okay. So you plan you plan tours of the hospital, you plan multiple meetings, you plan time with the physician practice, you plan time in the hospital, you plan a dinner, you plan a follow-up discussion the next day. I mean, it is a 24-hour event that you don't want to blow the opportunity
Yeah.
that you have. And so
You
I
you
have
get
this
the
doctor.
you get the Tom, I
Go
was gonna
ahead.
say you even get the local wildlife. You get the local wildlife expert to put a bald eagle in a cage, and at the appropriate time when you give the cue, they release it so it flies
Yeah.
across the parking lot. I mean, it's no holds barred.
Dang right. I mean,
Throw your
yes,
story.
I mean, if they like golf, you plan golf. I mean, if they like a particular type of food, you choose that restaurant for lunch. You bring in the mayor. I
Yeah.
mean, you do whatever you got to do to impress the doctors. But so I have this
Right.
doctor coming in. He's an FP, family practitioner, and he says to me before he comes, my wife really would like to participate not only in the dinner, but all the other activities. And I said, okay, that's fine. I thought it was a little weird, but I thought that's fine. I said, like the meetings, and he's like, yeah, she wants to meet everybody. She wants to see everything. I'm like, well, okay, all right, that's okay. Again, I mean, I'm not going to say no. I mean, okay. So anyway, so I mean, schedule set. I've got this amazing person that helps me coordinate the entire 24 hours. She's in charge. I just do my part. But the beginning of this visit is supposed to be 1 hour with me, one on one with the doctor, and in this case, the wife in my office. And then we're going to do a tour of the hospital. So we got the agenda, we got the plan. So the doctor shows up with the wife, and I am literally about 25 minutes into this 1 hour, and this is going poorly. I like the doctor, but the wife is crazy. I mean, I'm just going to say it. She's batshit. I mean, she's out there. She's one of these people that I was trying not to let my jaw drop when she said something because I'm like, she's nuts. And she's better looking than he is. So we got, that at play also. So it's kind of like, wow, what's happening here? Um, and so anyway, so 25 minutes in, I call my person who coordinates the visit, who's also doing the tour. And I said, hey, we're ready for the tour. And they can't see her, but I can see her. And she gives me this eat crap look. She knows exactly what I'm doing, is I am pawning off this doctor on her. And she mouths to me, I hate you. And I take it because I am dumping this doctor on her. And so they start the tour. I call this guy was going to join this multi-specialty group. So I call the president of the group and said, hey, I'm going to cut this
He's
visit
yours.
short. I know we've got 24 hours planned, but I'm going to cut this short. And he said, but Tom, we've got this big plan. And I said, I know. And he said, yeah, and my wife had big dinner plans. She's already cooking. We got like, 12, 14 people coming over for dinner at my house tonight. You know, I'm not going to cancel this because my wife's going to be upset. She's excited about this.
You're like,
And I
yeah,
said, I
yeah.
said,
I have diarrhea.
well, that wouldn't have worked. They just would have gone on without me. So I say, well, I'm calling your wife, who I know her well. And he goes, that's fine. So I call her, and she argues with me too because she's excited about this social event. And she's got all the plans and all these different things. And I said, well, I'm telling you now, this is a mistake. It's a mistake. And she's like, no, Tom, it'll be fine. And I'm like, it's not going to be fine, but okay. So I get off the phone and now I'm feeling dejected because I'm stuck with this doctor all day also. I mean, keep in mind, I've got to keep him entertained until dinner at whatever it was, 6 or something. So I decide one last ditch effort. I call the practice administrator and try to get him to kill the visit. And he's not willing to kill the visit either. And so here we go. So now I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I got 24 hours of dealing with these people that I'm not going to recruit. This is unbelievable. So lunch doesn't go any better than anything else. I'm starting to get stories about when they did the hospital tour. The wife starts telling a story about how she had surgery on her hip, pulls up her skirt and shows somebody where she had surgery. I mean, it's that level of crazy going on. And the doctor seems fine,
Yeah,
but I just can't do the wife. And so
yeah.
early afternoon, I try again to get the dinner canceled. And I get exactly the same thing. It's fine. It's fine. So fast forward to hors d'oeuvres and drinks before dinner. We're at the physician's house. We got 12, 14 people there. Everybody's having a good time. And my wife, your sister, who I adore because of multiple reasons, but one of the things is she's like me. She can't let something go. If somebody says something and she's curious where it's going to go, she's got to ask a follow-up question. So we're standing there having a drink, eating peanuts, eating hors d'oeuvres, and the wife says that her husband, everything he learned about medicine was saving her chihuahua. And my wife says, ah, tell me more about this. And the short version of what happened to the chihuahua is they lived in a house where the trash cans were behind the house. So there was a road going in between the houses. And this little dog had gotten run over by a dump truck. And she panics, gets her husband, who happens to be in medical school, and says, you have to save this dog. And he spends days, weeks saving the dog. So apparently that's how he's learned everything he knows about medicine. Keep in mind that this is a doctor I brought in for a recruitment visit. Everybody's listening to this story.
Yeah.
And she laughs and she says, and the wife laughs and she says, well, yeah, she said, because I just cannot imagine what our lives would be like without Shawilly. And going back to my wife goes, Shawilly? And she goes,
Willie.
yes. She said, that's the name of the dog. And my wife says, well, where did the name Shawilly come from? And she said, well, when the dog was little and we had to take it out to go potty, um, number one wasn't a big problem, but number two, the dog just didn't seem focused on the task at hand. And so, and so my husband, this doctor, would follow the dog around the yard going, shit, Willie. And so we just shortened it to call it Shawilly.
That's so good.
We walk in
I've learned.
after that, I walk
Go.
into the kitchen, okay? The doctor's wife, who's cooked this massive dinner, grabs me by the arm, drags me into a separate room, and says, I had no idea. And I said, I warned you. She said, well, we can't do this. And I said, oh, no. I tried to cancel this not once. I tried twice, both times with three separate people. We're in it now. I said, we're going to enjoy dinner. And I almost had a moment like Christmas Vacation. We're going to be the
Yeah.
happiest bunch.
Yeah.
When Santa comes down the chimney. So dinner's a
Yeah.
disaster. I mean, everybody just is laughing. This is awful. The next morning, I get a call from the practice administrator at like 7:45 a.m. Hey, Tom, I know the doctor's supposed to spend the morning at our practice, but I think we're just going to stop right here. And I said, oh, no, no, sir. I spent the last 24 hours with this doctor and his wife. I said, you got him. He's yours. And there's this really long pause. He says, what do you want? I said, what I want for what? And he said, what do you want in return for canceling this visit? I said, we'll deal with that later. I said, but you owe me. So this doctor shows up like 10 minutes later, walks in with his wife, and I have to tell them the recruitment visit's over. And I swear to this day, I was not the first person that had ever done that to them. They took it great. They didn't even ask why. It was
There's
nuts. But yeah, that's the story of Shawilly.
there's so many good takeaways in there. One, I mean, you need like a Shawilly trophy for like the perfect recruit, or to call your recruiter Shawilly. I mean, so many good ones. I love too at the continued drill down questions that she was asking at dinner. Well, tell me more about that. I learned, I think, later in life than I would have liked to, the importance of asking that one more question, building a deeper
Oh yeah.
relationship. And I know that wasn't necessarily the intent there, but she's so inquisitive, like, well, I've got to know more about that, right?
Oh yeah. You can't let it
I
go.
love it.
If somebody throws a softball, you have to hit it.
Yeah, yeah. So good. I
Yeah,
think
it's crazy.
I think one of the great takeaways, just going back to my story and another I had in mind, um, these things that we go through, particularly with the staff in the hospital, is how close it brings you together. You know,
Oh
I,
yeah.
I never forget April Fool's now. I've certainly never forgotten that story. And Charles and he and I trade text every April Fool's Day. Usually it's a bird finger emoji. It doesn't take a whole lot of words. We all know what it's, in reference to, and we get chuckles out of it and love the guy. We had another, not a comical story, but just one of those happenings in a hospital that kind of disrupt your day that, just reminds you of how awesome it is to work in that setting. We had created a prayer garden in the back of one of the hospitals that I was running, and had a fountain and a cross and some scripture on different stones. A real pretty setting. Well, we had a provider employed by the hospital, and his office was back behind the hospital, but he was coming into work early one morning. It was in the 6 o'clock hour somewhere, 6:15 or so, if I recall. He ends up having a heart attack in the prayer garden. And
Wow.
he was a young guy. I mean, I want to say, early to early, maybe mid 40s at that point. And long story short, heart attack, went down in the shrubbery in the garden. Well, one of the assistants in our graduate medical education area happened to look out her window as she's working early on some things and saw a guy laying in the bushes. She thought it was someone who had, laid down during the night, deciding it was a good place to sleep, and she was gonna, go out there and suggest that they move along. That hospital visitors and staff and all were about to show up for the day. Probably not a good place to sleep. So she goes out there, and as she approaches him and is gonna give him a little nudge, she realizes it's one of our physicians. So
Wow.
she, not knowing how long he had been down, she runs in, calls a code. Long story short, they rush out there, the code team. They come rolling through the hospital. He ends up with multiple bypasses, survived. It was just a remarkable event overall to see the code team respond. We decided to go back and look at some of our security footage. I wanted to see it, and so I took some pictures from the security camera of the entire team going down the hall, six of them pushing and around the stretcher, one on top of the stretcher giving chest compressions to our physician as they went by on the hall, and took a screenshot of that video surveillance photo and matted and framed it for him. And we had like a reception after he had a full recovery. He just wanted to come together and thank all of the staff for the job they do each and every day, and certainly for the job they did for him that day. Just, some of those stories that we reflect back on and think it's a special place to work. We get to, take care of people each and every day, and sometimes we get to take care of our own.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many different stories. I had an ER doctor working night shift, and literally, clocks out, for lack of a better term, leaves because the day shift doctor had come on, and 10 minutes later, the ambulance pulls up to the ER. And they have this doctor in the ambulance. He was literally pulling out of the hospital campus, got T-boned, and he's right back there with us. And it was awful.
Wow.
But the teams, absolutely saved his life, and it's fascinating how many of those stories. But yeah, healthcare, people who choose healthcare as a profession are amazing people, because they have this really caring attitude, but they also have this high level of intelligence, and then on top of it, they've got this great sense of humor, that, and they know when to use the humor in the right moments. But your point's exceptionally valid, and I love your story about the construction project with the April Fool's joke human remains, because that, I could go back and I've got a dozen of those stories about how the team kind of lifted each other up. And the
Yeah.
appropriate timed prank. Those are real, and it makes a big difference. But
Yeah.
the number of times we just get crazy stuff thrown at us. I've said on this podcast before, I took my first hospital CEO job when I was 27 and had zero idea what I was doing. None. But I was there at that
Yeah.
hospital for about 3 weeks, and my HR director walks in. And we have this ability to kind of put on this persona and to not overreact, not to, show cracks in our serious approach to things. But my HR director's in there, and she said, "I know you're pretty new here, but I need some help solving a problem." And I said, "Okay." And so she starts telling me this bizarre story of, we had I can't remember, I think it was a prisoner from the jail. I don't think it was prison, that was brought in by an officer. And for whatever reason, so they're in the ER, whatever reason, somebody decides it's appropriate and a good idea that this nurse by herself takes this patient up the elevator one floor to radiology for an image that has been ordered by the ER doctor. And I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. I to this day, I never got an answer to that question. But she's telling me this story, and the elevator got stuck between floors, um, for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then the elevator resumes to the floor. Well, nobody can really figure out what's happened with this elevator. Okay. And in the ER, before the patient is discharged to leave, he he says, "Can I get the phone number for the nurse?" And they look at him and say, "We can't give you the phone number for the nurse." And he goes, "Oh, it's okay. She'll want to give it to me." They said, "No, sir, I don't believe that's the case." And he said, "No, she said to call him or to call her when I get out of jail." And they're like, "Okay, this is really weird." So they go they go find her and she's like, "Yeah, that's fine. You can give him my cell phone number." So red flags everywhere now. I mean, everybody's like, "What the heck's going on?" Well, what she finally admits to is when the elevator stopped between floors. Apparently, she decided it was a good idea to provide, shall we say, outstanding customer service to this prisoner. I'm not going to say what I was told that day by my HR director, but she provided outstanding service, and they agreed to meet back up once he was a free man. So I
Hmm.
am sitting at 27 in my office as the hospital CEO, listening to this story, and I'm doing everything in my power not to have my jaw laying on my desk because I'm like, holy crap, what's going on? And and my HR director stops talking. And I said, "Okay, so why did you tell me this whole story?" And she said, "Well, I need you to make a decision on what we're going to do with this nurse." And I said the only thing that was going through my head, I said, "She still works here?" And they had not done anything. It had been 3 weeks. Nothing. She admitted to all of it. And it just, the crazy stuff that happens in hospitals is just, it's nuts. But it does kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, it kind of brings people together because you do, deal with so many serious things, and oftentimes you deal with
Yeah.
even death. And so the bonds that develop between the healthcare workers, I think they're important because it helps us maintain our sanity.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, no takeaway from veterans out there and combat service, but it's similar in the fashion that, to your point, these people are, it's a 24/7 operation. There is no downtime. While we're trying to provide this excellent customer service and this wow experience, people are also there not at the Ritz in Cancun or something, right? It's not a lavish vacation. They're there because something's broken, something's hurt. They're losing someone important to them. It's a lot of sadness, and so I think kudos to the clinicians in the mix all across the board, and all the cogs in the wheel that make the healthcare experience work. They're all walking into rooms and dealing with difficult situations every single minute of every single day. Sure, there's some happiness. There's the labor and delivery unit and some newborns and good news coming out of a recovery and other things like that. But there is also a lot of difficult conversation and struggles. So I've always been a fan of having fun at work. There's a time and place for it, to our points earlier. And so to the extent we can, share in some celebrations and reward and recognize staff at the appropriate times. A story jumped out at me when you were in the middle of that one. There's a space in buildings called interstitial space, and if you're not familiar with that, many on the podcast have seen it and know it, but it's essentially space that's built into a building that's in between floors. So in one of the facilities I was in, one section of the hospital had 2 floors, and so in between floor 1 and floor 2, there was about 5 feet of built-in, poured concrete space in between the floors, and so it's like an attic crawl space, if you will, in between the 2 floors. And so if the planning is done right when you're building a project from the start, having that interstitial space built in is amazing, because from a plant operations perspective, if you're needing to, run additional water, electrical, network cable, anything else, you've got all that space to function in, right? So, this facility I was in had interstitial space. And so you get in the elevator and it's floor 1, floor 2. And if you have the right key to turn, it can stop on floor 1B or something like that, which is this interstitial window, right? So the plant ops team or biomedical engineering would use that space to store some things, maybe an extra stretcher or, whatever else it may be, air filters or something like that. And so there was a Halloween, and some of the crew decided that they would dress up in like a scary clown costume. And so when the elevator was going from floor to from one to two, they could push the button because they're in the interstitial space. So the elevator would stop at that in between floor, and they'd be standing there in that scary clown costume. And the door, it was two doors, right? There's a main door, then there's a back door that doesn't open unless it's interstitial space. So that door comes open, and there's someone standing there staring them down. There was more fun that night with people freaking out in the elevator. Of course, sitting there in administration, when I hear this story the next day and see some videos people had taken, I'm like, what if someone had passed out, had a heart attack, hit their head in there? It's funny. Okay, moving along, right? But anyway, it got a good laugh for them and some good humor amidst, they weren't out and able to go trick-or-treating with their families and children, so it offered a little laugh in the night to some people.
Thank you, Mike. Make sure you don't miss part 2 of this podcast, and you will find it on all your streaming platforms.
Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Badlands podcast. As always, please like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. If you have suggestions for topics or guests, please email those to podcast@badlands.pro. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. Some information shared may include fictitious names. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and/or guests and are their own and not reflective of the opinions of others or our sponsors. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of the Healthcare Badlands podcast. Until then,